The giant Viking's calloused hand trembled as he reached toward the widow's face, his voice barely above a whisper in the flickering firelight. "I would trade 10 furs for one night with you." The words hung in the smoky air of the longhouse like an offering, desperate and raw. Outside, the winter wind howled against the wooden walls, but inside, time seemed suspended between them. Lisa Chavez pulled back slightly, her dark eyes searching his weathered features for any hint of mockery or cruelty. She had learned to read men's intentions in the harsh months since her husband's death, when survival meant distinguishing between those who would protect and those who would prey. But in Aaron Martin's pale blue gaze, she found something unexpected: vulnerability. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the rough-hewn beams above them. Aaron's massive frame seemed to fold in on itself as he waited for her response. This man who could cleave through enemies' shields with his battle axe, now rendered powerless by a simple woman's silence. His offer was not what it seemed. In this frozen wasteland where winter claimed more lives than war, 10 furs meant warmth, meant survival, meant the difference between waking to another dawn or joining the frozen dead beneath the snow. And he was willing to trade it all for something far more precious than her body. He was asking for her trust. Lisa's breath misted in the cold air as she considered his words. 3 months ago, she would never have imagined herself in this position, a Spanish merchant's daughter turned Viking widow, sitting across from a Norse warrior whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. Aaron the Wanderer, they called him. The giant who fought alone and answered to no jarl. The man who had appeared at her door when the first snows fell, offering firewood without explanation, disappearing before she could thank him. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The story of how they reached this moment began not with passion, but with desperation. The autumn winds had carried death to their settlement like a plague. Lisa remembered the morning her husband Paul Cook failed to return from his fishing expedition, how she had stood on the rocky shore scanning the gray horizon until her eyes burned with salt and sorrow. The other wives had found their men washed ashore, broken against the jagged rocks by the sudden storm. But Paul's body never returned to her, claimed instead by the hungry sea that had given them life for so many years. In the weeks that followed, the settlement's dynamics shifted like sand beneath her feet. Without Paul's protection, without his skill as a fisherman to contribute to the community stores, Lisa found herself increasingly isolated. The other families had their own survival to consider as winter approached, and a foreign-born widow with no children represented nothing but another mouth to feed. She caught the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, saw the calculating looks when she appeared at the communal meals. Richard Parker, the settlement's unofficial leader, made his position clear without ever speaking it directly. Come spring, if she survived the winter, she would need to find somewhere else to call home. The first time Aaron appeared, Lisa mistook him for a threat. She had been struggling to split firewood behind her small dwelling when his shadow fell across her, blocking out the weak afternoon sun. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his blonde hair streaked with premature gray, wearing the leather and fur that marked him as a warrior. A massive axe hung from his belt, and scars crisscrossed his exposed forearms like a map of past battles. Lisa gripped her small hatchet tighter, ready to fight or die, but unwilling to surrender without resistance. Instead of violence, Aaron had simply gestured toward the pile of unsplit logs. When she nodded, too surprised to refuse, he had taken her hatchet and worked in silence for the better part of an hour. His movements were efficient, economical, each swing splitting the wood cleanly. When he finished, he had stacked the firewood neatly against her wall and disappeared into the forest without a word. Lisa stood in her doorway long after he vanished, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. The gifts began appearing after that. A brace of rabbits hung from her door handle, a sack of grain left on her doorstep, a thick bearskin that appeared draped over her woodpile during the first hard freeze. Always when she was away, always without explanation. The other settlers noticed, of course, and their whispered speculation grew more pointed. Some suggested she had taken a secret lover. Others wondered if she had struck some bargain with the strange warrior who lived alone in the forest. Lisa knew better than to correct their assumptions. Let them think what they would. The gifts meant survival, and survival was all that mattered. The first conversation between them came by accident. Lisa had been returning from the stream with water when she stumbled on the icy path, her wooden bucket flying from her hands to shatter against a stone. The precious water soaked immediately into the frozen ground, and she knelt beside the broken pieces, fighting back tears of frustration. Winter had already claimed too much from her. She could not afford to lose anything else. "The Cooper will make you another." Aaron's voice startled her. She looked up to find him emerging from the tree line, carrying his own water bucket carved from a single piece of oak. He set it down beside her and began gathering the broken staves of her bucket. "John Brown owes me a favor." Lisa watched his careful movements, the way he handled even the broken pieces with respect. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you help me?" Aaron paused in his gathering, his pale eyes meeting hers. For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. "My wife was foreign-born too, from the southern lands, like you. When she died, the settlement made it clear she had never truly belonged. They buried her outside the consecrated ground, said her foreign gods had no place among our ancestors." He resumed collecting the broken wood. "I left that place the same day." The revelation hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Lisa understood then that his gifts were not charity, but recognition. He saw in her struggle an echo of his own loss, his own displacement. They were both outsiders now, marked by grief and circumstance. "What was her name?" Lisa asked softly. "Megan Hill." Aaron's voice carried a tenderness that transformed his harsh features. "She used to say that home was not a place but a feeling, a warmth you carried inside you." He stood, the broken staves gathered in his massive hands. "I have been cold for a very long time." From that day forward, their interactions grew more frequent, though always brief. Aaron would appear when Lisa needed help with tasks too difficult for her smaller frame, repairing her roof before the heavy snows, reinforcing her door against the winter winds, checking her food stores and quietly supplementing them when they ran low. In return, Lisa began preparing extra portions when she cooked, leaving them where Aaron would find them during his visits. It was a careful dance of mutual aid, neither acknowledging the growing connection between them. The settlement watched their arrangement with increasing suspicion. Richard Parker made pointed comments about foreign influences and the importance of maintaining traditional ways. Patricia Patel, the settlement's most vocal gossip, spread rumors about midnight visits and unholy alliances. But Lisa had learned to ignore their whispers. Aaron's presence in her life meant the difference between survival and death, and she would not apologize for choosing to live. The turning point came during the worst storm of the winter. Lisa woke to find her dwelling filled with smoke, the wind having blown down her chimney and scattered burning embers across her floor. She managed to contain the fire before it spread, but not before it consumed most of her remaining firewood and filled her small space with choking smoke. Outside, the blizzard raged with such fury that venturing out meant certain death. She huddled in her furs, watching her breath mist in the rapidly cooling air, and wondered if this would be how her story ended. Aaron found her 3 days later when the storm finally broke. He kicked in her door when she failed to respond to his calls, expecting to find her frozen corpse. Instead, he discovered her barely conscious, wrapped in every piece of fabric she owned, her lips blue with cold. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms and carried her through the snow to his own dwelling deep in the forest. Lisa's memories of the journey were fragmented, the warmth of Aaron's body against hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing as he navigated the treacherous path, the sound of his voice, low and soothing, telling her to hold on, that she was safe now. When consciousness fully returned, she found herself in a dwelling unlike any she had seen in the settlement. Aaron's home was built into a natural cave, its walls lined with stone and timber, a massive fireplace carved directly into the rock face. Furs covered every surface, and the air was warm and dry. "You have been sleeping for 2 days," Aaron said when he noticed her stirring. He sat beside the fire, working on some piece of leather craft, his movements patient and methodical. "The fever broke this morning." Lisa tried to sit up and discovered she wore only a thin shift, her own clothes nowhere to be seen. Heat flooded her cheeks, but Aaron seemed oblivious to her embarrassment. Your clothes were wet, he explained without looking up from his work. They are drying by the fire. You nearly died from the cold. The casual way he spoke of her near death unsettled her less than the realization of how completely she had been at his mercy. He could have taken advantage of her unconsciousness, could have demanded payment for his rescue. Instead, she found evidence of careful nursing. A bowl of broth sat cooling beside the bed. Clean bandages wrapped a cut on her hand she did not remember receiving. Her hair had been combed and braided to keep it from tangling during her fever dreams. "What did I?" she asked again, the same question that had haunted their interactions from the beginning. This time, Aaron set down his work and looked at her directly. "Because you remind me that there was a time when I believed in something beyond survival." He stood and moved to the fire, adding another log to the flames. "Because when I see you fighting to live, I remember why living matters." During her recovery, Lisa learned the true measure of Aaron's isolation. His dwelling showed signs of years of solitary habitation. Everything was built for one person, organized with the precision of someone who had no one else to consider. He moved through his daily routines with mechanical efficiency, speaking little, his interactions with her careful and formal. Yet she began to notice small details that revealed the man beneath the warrior's facade. Books, carefully wrapped in oiled leather, filled a wooden chest beside his bed. Not the crude scratches that passed for writing among most of the settlers, but actual books with real pages and binding. When Lisa expressed surprise at their existence, Aaron's expression grew guarded. "Megan taught me to read," he admitted. "She said knowledge was the one treasure that could never be stolen." Lisa asked to see them, and Aaron hesitantly produced a volume of poetry written in a language she recognized. "This is Spanish," she said, running her fingers over the familiar words. "Where did you get this?" "From a trader who came through our settlement years ago. Megan made me buy it because she said it reminded her of you." Aaron paused, realizing what he had revealed. "Not you specifically, but someone like you, someone from the southern lands who might be homesick." The book became a bridge between them. Lisa read aloud in the evenings, translating the Spanish verses into Norse, sharing stories of her homeland that she had not spoken of in years. Aaron listened with the intensity of a man starved for human connection, asking careful questions about her life before Paul, before the settlement, before the long chain of circumstances that had brought her to this frozen land. In return, he began to share fragments of his own story, how he had met Megan when she was little more than a slave, captured in a raid on a southern trading post, how he had bought her freedom and then spent months convincing her that his intentions were honorable, how they had built a life together despite the suspicion and hostility of his people, how her death in childbirth had shattered something inside him that he had never learned to repair. "She made me believe I could be more than just a weapon," Aaron said one evening as they sat before the fire. "With her, I was not Aaron the Wanderer or Aaron the Berserker. I was just Aaron. A man who loved his wife and wanted to build something lasting." Lisa understood the weight of that confession. In their world, identity was often inseparable from function. A warrior who could not fight was nothing. A woman who could not bear children was worthless. But in the space between them, warmed by firelight and shared stories, they were discovering the possibility of being simply themselves. The days passed in a rhythm of quiet domesticity that surprised them both. Aaron would leave each morning to check his trap lines and hunt for fresh meat. Lisa would tend the fire, prepare their meals, and slowly regain her strength. In the evenings, they would share food and conversation, the silences between them growing comfortable rather than awkward. It was during one of these quiet moments that Aaron made his confession about the furs. "I have been watching you since the first day you arrived in the settlement," Aaron said, his words careful and measured. "Not stalking, watching. The way you carried yourself, despite your fear. The way you refused to let them see you break, even when Paul died and they began to turn away from you." He stared into the fire as he spoke, unable to meet her eyes. "You have a strength that most warriors would envy." Lisa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment this time. No one had spoken to her of strength in months. Since Paul's death, she had been defined by her weaknesses, her foreignness, her dependence on others' charity. To hear Aaron acknowledge her resilience felt like being seen for the first time in ages. I do not feel strong, she admitted. Most days, I feel like I am drowning. Strength is not the absence of fear, Aaron replied. It is the choice to continue despite the fear. You make that choice every day. The conversation that followed was the longest they had shared, touching on subjects they had both avoided. Lisa spoke of her homesickness, her grief not just for Paul, but for the life she had imagined they would build together. Aaron revealed his own struggles with purpose, how the loss of Megan had left him adrift in a world that valued him only for his ability to kill. They were both, in their own ease, refugees from lives that had been destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. When I said I would trade 10 furs for one night with you, Aaron said eventually, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire, I was not speaking of desire. Not in the way most would understand it. He finally looked at her, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. I was speaking of the desire to feel human again, to remember what it means to connect with another soul. Lisa studied his face, reading the vulnerability there like text on a page. She understood now why his offer had felt different from the crude propositions she had endured from other men. He was not asking for her body. He was asking for her presence, her warmth, her willingness to see him as more than the sum of his scars and reputation. And what would I receive in return? She asked softly. Aaron's expression grew uncertain, as if he had not considered that she might want something beyond physical comfort. What would you want? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Lisa realized that for the first time since Paul's death, she was being asked what she wanted, not what she was willing to accept. The power of choice, even in such a small matter, felt revolutionary. I want to be seen, she said finally, not as a burden or a charity case or a foreign curiosity. I want to be valued for who I am, not pitied for what I have lost. Aaron nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a current. Then we are asking for the same thing. The night they finally came together was nothing like the desperate coupling Lisa had expected. Instead, it began with Aaron carefully braiding flowers into her hair, small winter blooms he had somehow found despite the frozen ground. His massive hands moved with surprising gentleness, his touch reverent rather than possessive. When he finished, he sat back and looked at her as if she were something precious, something worth cherishing. You are beautiful, he said simply, and Lisa believed him because she could see the truth of it reflected in his eyes. What followed was a slow exploration of trust and tenderness. Aaron's touch was patient, questioning, always waiting for her permission before proceeding. He mapped the scars left by her hard life with the same care he showed his books, treating each mark as evidence of her survival rather than damage to be overlooked. When she traced the battle scars that crossed his chest and arms, he did not flinch or make excuses for the violence they represented. Instead, he told her the story behind each one, not as boasts of conquest, but as chapters in the long journey that had brought him to her. They made love with the desperate tenderness of two people who had forgotten what it meant to be touched with kindness. There was passion, but it was tempered by something deeper. Recognition, acceptance, the profound relief of being truly seen by another human being. When they finally lay exhausted in each other's arms, Lisa felt something she had not experienced since childhood. Safety. Stay, Aaron whispered against her hair as she began to drift toward sleep. Not just tonight, stay. Lisa knew he was asking for more than her physical presence. He was asking her to choose him, to choose this life they might build together in his hidden dwelling. The offer was tempting beyond measure. Here she could be free from the judgment and suspicion of the settlement. Here she could be valued and protected and loved. But she also knew that accepting would mean abandoning the life she had fought so hard to preserve. I cannot hide forever, she said softly. Eventually, I must face what waits for me in the settlement. Aaron's arms tightened around her, but he didn't argue. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the weight of unfinished business. Then we face it together, he said finally, when you are ready. The promise hung between them as they fell asleep, a commitment neither fully understood but both desperately needed. Outside, the wind continued its endless song, but inside Aaron's dwelling, wrapped in his arms and warmed by his presence, Lisa felt the first stirrings of hope she had known in months. Their return to the settlement came sooner than either had expected. Noah Jones, one of the younger men, appeared at Aaron's dwelling 3 days later, his face grim with news. "Raiders," he said without preamble. "A ship was spotted off the coast yesterday. Richard Parker sent me to find you. He says the settlement needs every warrior who can hold a blade." Aaron's transformation was immediate and unsettling. The gentle man who had braided flowers in Lisa's hair disappeared, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. He began gathering his weapons with practiced efficiency, his movements sharp and focused. Lisa watched him strap on his battle gear, understanding that she was seeing Aaron the Wanderer for the first time, the legendary warrior whose reputation had spread throughout the northern lands. "I have to go," he said, but his eyes remained on Lisa, torn between duty and desire. "They will not survive without experienced fighters." Lisa nodded, understanding the necessity even as her heart clenched with fear. She had found safety and love, only to have it threatened by the same violence that had claimed her first husband. But she also understood that Aaron's willingness to fight for the settlement, despite their treatment of her, was part of what made him the man she had come to love. "I will come with you," she said, beginning to gather her own belongings. Aaron shook his head immediately. "It is too dangerous. You should stay here where it is safe." "Safe from raiders, perhaps," Lisa replied, continuing her preparations. "But not safe from my own conscience. These people may have turned their backs on me, but they are still my neighbors. I will not hide while they face death." The argument that followed was brief but intense. Aaron's protective instincts warred with his respect for Lisa's autonomy, while Lisa struggled to make him understand that her survival meant nothing if it came at the cost of her humanity. In the end, they reached a compromise. Lisa would return to the settlement, but she would remain with the other women and children in the central hall while the men prepared their defenses. The journey back through the forest was tense and silent. Aaron moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his senses alert for any sign of danger. Lisa followed in his footsteps, marveling at how completely he had transformed from lover to warrior. When they finally emerged from the tree line and saw the settlement spread before them, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief at seeing familiar sights, anxiety about the reception awaiting her, and underneath it all, a growing sense that this confrontation would change everything. The settlement was in chaos when they arrived. Men sharpened weapons and reinforced barricades while women packed essential supplies and prepared to evacuate the children if necessary. The sight of Aaron emerging from the forest caused a stir of relief and apprehension. Everyone knew his reputation, but few trusted his motivations. When they saw Lisa beside him, the whispers began immediately. Richard Parker approached them with the wary respect reserved for dangerous allies. "Aaron, we are grateful you came." His eyes flicked to Lisa, and his expression hardened. "Though I question the wisdom of bringing additional mouths to feed during a siege." "She belongs here as much as anyone," Aaron replied, his voice carrying a warning that made several nearby men shift uncomfortably. "And she has skills that might prove useful." Lisa stepped forward before the confrontation could escalate. "I can tend wounds and prepare medicines," she said, addressing Richard directly. "I can also organize the evacuation of children if it becomes necessary. I am not asking for charity. I am offering to help." The calculation in Richard's eyes was visible as he weighed her potential usefulness against his personal dislike. Finally, pragmatism won. "Very well. Report to Patricia Patel with the other women. But understand that resources are limited and loyalty is earned through action, not words." Lisa nodded, accepting the conditional welcome. As she moved toward the central hall, she felt Aaron's eyes following her, his concern palpable even across the distance. She turned back once to meet his gaze, trying to communicate reassurance and determination in a single look. Then she disappeared into the crowd of women and children, leaving him to focus on the coming battle. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. Lisa threw herself into the work of organizing supplies and comforting frightened children, grateful for tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The other women watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, but her obvious competence gradually earned their grudging acceptance. When young Andrea Gutierrez cut her hand while sharpening a knife, Lisa's quick treatment of the wound and her gentle manner with the girl softened some of the hostility. As evening approached, the raiders' ship was spotted approaching the harbor. The settlement's defenders took their positions along the wooden palisade, while the women and children retreated to the central hall. Lisa found herself helping to barricade the doors and windows, her heart racing as she listened to the shouts and preparations outside. Somewhere beyond those walls, Aaron was preparing to risk his life for people who had never shown him kindness. The thought filled her with a mixture of pride and terror. The attack came with the rising tide, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the settlement's defenses through sheer brutality. Lisa heard the clash of weapons and the screams of wounded men, but the thick walls of the hall muffled the sounds into an indistinct nightmare of violence. She moved among the women and children, offering what comfort she could while fighting her own rising panic. Every crash against the walls, every distant cry, might signal Aaron's death. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Then suddenly, the sounds of combat began to fade, replaced by shouts of victory from the settlement's defenders. Lisa's knees nearly buckled with relief, but she forced herself to remain calm as the women around her began to weep with gratitude and exhaustion. When the doors of the hall finally opened, Aaron stood in the entrance, bloodied but alive. His eyes immediately sought Lisa among the crowd, and the relief in his expression when he found her was visible to everyone present. He was wounded, a deep gash along his left arm, and smaller cuts on his face and hands. But he moved with the steady purpose of a man who had survived another battle. "The raiders are dead or fled," he announced to the room. "The settlement is safe." The celebration that followed was muted by exhaustion and grief for the men who had not survived the attack. But there was also a palpable sense of relief and gratitude, emotions that extended even to Aaron despite his outsider status. Richard Parker, nursing a wounded shoulder, made a point of publicly thanking the giant warrior for his crucial role in the defense. It was the closest thing to acceptance Aaron had ever received from the settlement's leadership. Lisa tended to Aaron's wounds with hands that trembled only slightly, her touch gentle but efficient. As she cleaned the gash on his arm, she became aware that the other women were watching them with new interest. The way Aaron submitted to her care, the obvious intimacy between them, the protective way he positioned himself even while wounded, all painted a picture that was difficult to ignore. "You fought well," Patricia Patel said to Aaron as Lisa finished bandaging his arm. There was grudging respect in her voice and something that might have been apology. "The settlement owes you a debt." Aaron nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. His attention remained focused on Lisa, his eyes cataloging her condition with the thoroughness of a man who had feared he might never see her again. When she finished with his bandages, he caught her hand in his, a gesture so natural and unconscious that it spoke volumes about the bond between them. The conversation that followed was awkward but necessary. Richard Parker, perhaps motivated by guilt over his earlier treatment of Lisa or pragmatism about Aaron's value as a defender, made an offer that surprised everyone present. "The settlement could use a permanent warrior of your caliber," he said to Aaron. "And a woman with healing skills," he added, glancing at Lisa. "If you were willing to stay, we could find a place for both of you." Lisa felt her heart stop as she waited for Aaron's response. This was the acceptance she had longed for, the chance to belong somewhere without apology or condition, but it was also a test of what they had built together in the forest, whether their connection could survive the pressures of community life and social expectation. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on Lisa's palm as he considered. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and careful. "I will stay if Lisa wishes it, but I will not pretend to be something I am not. I am a warrior and a wanderer. I follow no jarl and swear no oaths beyond those I choose freely." The negotiation that followed established the terms of their integration into the settlement. Aaron would serve as a defender during times of crisis, but would not be bound by the everyday politics and hierarchies that governed community life. Lisa would contribute her skills as a healer and organizer while maintaining her independence as Aaron's chosen partner. It was an unusual arrangement, but one that recognized the unique value they brought as a unit. In the days that followed, Lisa and Aaron established their place in the settlement's social fabric with careful deliberation. They built a dwelling at the edge of the community, close enough to participate in communal activities, but far enough away to maintain their privacy. Aaron's reputation as a fierce warrior and Lisa's growing recognition as a skilled healer gradually overcame the suspicions and prejudices that had initially marked them as outsiders. The transformation was not immediate or complete. There were still whispered conversations and sideways glances, still moments when Lisa felt the weight of her foreign birth or Aaron faced suspicion about his loyalty. But there were also signs of genuine acceptance. Children who had once hidden from Aaron began to seek him out for stories of his travels. Women who had shunned Lisa began to ask for her advice on treating illness and injury. Most importantly, their relationship deepened and strengthened under the pressures of community life. The tenderness they had discovered in Aaron's forest dwelling did not disappear when transplanted to the settlement. If anything, it grew more precious for being shared in the presence of others. They learned to navigate the complexities of being a couple in a small community, balancing their need for intimacy with their responsibilities to the group. The winter that had begun with such desperation and isolation ended with the promise of spring and new beginnings. As the ice began to break up in the harbor and the first green shoots appeared in the settlement's gardens, Lisa found herself thinking not of survival, but of growth. She and Aaron began to plan not just for the next season, but for the years that might stretch ahead of them. "Do you ever regret it?" Aaron asked one evening as they sat outside their dwelling, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Staying here instead of disappearing into the forest with me?" Lisa considered the question seriously, as she did all of Aaron's inquiries into her emotional state. He still worried that he had somehow trapped or limited her, that his love was another form of cage. She understood his concern, having felt trapped herself for so long, but she also knew that what they had built together was the opposite of imprisonment. "I regret nothing," she said finally, taking his scarred hand in both of hers. "We found each other in the darkness, and we chose to build something in the light." "That is not something to regret." Aaron smiled, the expression transforming his harsh features into something approaching beauty. Around them, the settlement continued its evening routines. Children called in for supper, men returning from their work, women gathering to share the day's gossip and concerns. They were part of it now, woven into the fabric of community life, not as outsiders seeking acceptance, but as people who had earned their place through courage and commitment. The giant Viking and the foreign widow had become simply Aaron and Lisa, a couple whose love had grown from mutual recognition of strength and resilience. In a world where survival often meant sacrificing humanity, they had chosen to preserve both. And in making that choice, they had discovered that the greatest treasure was not gold or furs or even safety, but the simple miracle of being truly known by another soul. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Lisa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate widow who had once knelt beside a broken water bucket to the confident woman who now helped guide the settlement's children, she had traveled further than the miles between her old life and new. She had found not just love, but purpose, not just safety, but belonging. And in Aaron's steady presence beside her, she had discovered that home truly was not a place but a feeling, a warmth carried inside that no winter could extinguish.